Is accuracy important in a story set in the past, or can inaccuracy make it even better when done right? I enjoy reading the classics and historical fiction and watching period dramas or other things which aim to recapture different eras of the past. I particularly love stories based on true events, especially when they explore the lives of real people. Reverse1999 embraces inaccuracy instead, which can trigger a hunt for historical Easter eggs and lead you towards endless Wikipedia rabbit holes. This time, I ended up poking through obscure but fascinating corners of Parisian history. I've never even been to France. How does that happen? First, a bit of context. Last summer, I finally got around to trying out Reverse1999. Many people had recommended it to me, and it sounded very much my cup of tea, but I had so much else to do that I never got around to it, until BluePoc reached out and offered to sponsor a video, and agreed to give me free rein to share my unfiltered thoughts about the game. Since then, I've continued playing, and haven't missed a single day. I've been meaning to make more videos about it, since there's a ton to talk about, but while I've been collecting thoughts and ideas, life keeps getting in the way, and this is one of those things which keeps getting pushed back. But now, BluePoc reached out and offered to work together again, and gave me early access to this news story so I could share my experience with it. One of the most common expectations people bring to any historical fiction is that it should aim for accuracy. What many hope for is a window to the past, a chance to experience the lives of those who lived long ago, to see history through the eyes of people who were there, to explore the differences and the similarities to our modern world and feel our shared humanity across the ages. And if you're telling the story of specific events or specific real people, staying true to the details is extremely important. Many people judge these stories by this measure, and in a sense, this is objective. There are many layers to it. The little details of the era being portrayed can be vital. This is true of anything in fiction, but for many, it's the reason they look for these kinds of stories. Each person's level of familiarity with a given era will change just how accurate the details need to be for it to feel right. To an average person, most mistakes will pass by without any notice, and their enjoyment will depend more on how engaging the narrative itself turns out to be. To an expert, however, even small errors can shatter the illusion. Potatoes in a medieval meal, a breed of dog which did not exist until centuries later, even a note written on modern paper. People tend to forgive some slip-ups, but too many will leave them feeling like the story does not respect the era it's trying to evoke, and experts tend to care the most. And for a story to feel satisfying, it usually has to follow some kind of narrative structure, with comprehensible cause and effect which leads to a clear conclusion. Real life, meanwhile, is chaos, confusion, and coincidence, and lots of mere existence which does not conform to any meaning we might wish to breathe into events. Many aim for accuracy wherever possible, but even those will take shortcuts, fudge details, or skip over anything they deem unimportant to their goal of telling an engaging tale. And, as with the little details, there will be some people who know the minutiae of how things really happened, and their level of forgiveness for these shortcuts will depend on how well the story captures the bigger picture. Because in historical fiction, beyond the little details or the basic facts, there's a wider, deeper kind of authenticity which can buy forgiveness for any level of inaccuracy. When we know something didn't actually happen, or at least didn't happen like that, it's even more important that the series of events is plausible. A character's behavior reveals their inner world, assumptions they make about themselves and others, internal rules and subconscious scripts which shape their whole perspective, which options they can see, and the invisible walls which prevent them from even considering others. When these are authentic to the times, it feels like the story captures the soul of the era, which is by far the most important thing. When that soul is missing, even a story with incredible attention to detail can feel like a group of modern people doing cosplay. It takes a lot of effort to get all these kinds of details right. The more accurate a story is meant to be, the more each mistake will stand out. The further a story goes down that road, the more difficult it is to tell a satisfying narrative. But while accuracy builds trust, creates constraints, and grants legitimacy, inaccuracy is a valuable tool as well when used with intent. It comes in many forms. Some emerge from necessity more than anything else, such as the compression of timelines in a wider-ranging narrative, which lets the writer focus on the parts of history which matter to the story they're trying to tell, and cut out anything which doesn't. But it can be taken further too, to the point where deliberate inaccuracies become as much an art form as any other aspect of the story. If the goal of historical fiction is to bring the past to life by blending fact and imagination, then anything which brings that goal to fruition is worthwhile, even if it actively works against that objective ideal of factual accuracy. Sometimes the soul of an era cannot be captured in minutiae alone, and something more is needed. One interesting technique which can fly under the radar is a composite character. Any true history is affected by countless people, far too many for even a longer novel to convey in any reasonable depth without becoming hopelessly confusing to the audience. But if you were to remove them from the story, then their influence on the events at play would be missing too. Each person's contribution might be small, but if you remove enough of them, then it can make the whole thing fall apart. The solution is to combine the traits, stories, or experiences of multiple real individuals into one fictional character who fulfills all of their roles while presenting a more understandable face to the audience. They represent the truth despite being entirely fictional, a perfect shortcut to make a complex situation more comprehensible in the time a tale is given. At the other end of the spectrum is the idea of a gender flip. In the gacha sphere, this is often just for the fan service, but there's so much more that can be done with this concept. It can be a fascinating way to examine the culture of the time and the people involved. Societal norms are often very gendered, and if you flip a single historical figure's gender and seriously consider the implications, you create a cascade of changes which can at once introduce fascinating new scenarios and challenges to overcome, and expose the intricacies of the era from a unique perspective. By the simple fact that most historically significant figures are men, it's rare to see a famous woman turned into a man. After all, many of the most familiar stand out because they took on traditionally masculine roles, and swapping their gender would result in nothing interesting. But I'd love to see something like a gender-swapped Helen of Troy, a man so beautiful that his abduction sparked a war. It can be a more natural fit for figures of myth and legend, since all their details aren't based on established facts. But even for the most well-documented historical figures, a gender flip can explore the nature of a person and the things they did from a completely new perspective. And there's always the entire genre of alternate history, which starts from any given point in time and imagines a world where events progress very differently from there. These can vary wildly too, from the grim and dystopian exploration of a world in which the Axis powers won the Second World War in The Man in High Castle, to the irreverent, explosively cathartic tales told by Quentin Tarantino. This subgenre is defined by the details which differ from the real world, and these stories either explore the consequences of some seismic change or take simple joy in imagining something different. So, how does Reverse 1999 take this on? For anyone unfamiliar, it's a science fantasy RPG centered on time travel, which explores different periods and places in the 20th century. In the year 1999, a supernatural phenomenon called a time storm began to wreak havoc. These storms make time run backwards, and anyone caught in their vicinity disappears forever. Our protagonist is Vertin, a timekeeper immune to the storm's effects, whose power lets her travel through time. The story takes us to an eclectic variety of times and places, and in each area, we meet countless interesting characters as we investigate the storm and search for a way to prevent its effects. Each section of the game is grounded in a different historical and cultural backdrop, and it embraces deliberate inaccuracy to evoke that elusive soul of each new era. The setup has a lot in common with the alternate history approach, but rather than focusing on real events and speculating about a world in which they took a different course, it aims to find the vital cultural touchstones of the time and weave them into a coherent narrative which encapsulates the feel of the time and place at that more subconscious level. I love the end result. A story free from expectations, which feels fresh and interesting at every turn, but still captures the essence of a cultural moment with such poignancy. Each person, place, or item relevant to the plot tends to have real-world significance, combined in creative ways which explores that fleeting soul. The story released in version 3.2's flagship event is a great example. The era explored is Paris in the years just prior to World War II, 1936 to be precise. Parisian culture at the time was vibrant, a true centre of the development of modern literature, fashion, and art. The École de Paris is one of the most influential periods in the history of modern art, the source of movements as diverse as Surrealism, Cubism, Dada, Modernism, and so much more. The fashion of the era created iconic brands still famous to this day: Chanel, Lacoste, Balenciaga, and, of course, the intense debates of the time laid the groundwork for post-war French philosophy. It's a setting with breadth and depth impossible to capture from a singular perspective, but with a verve to it which has such appeal even to this day. So how exactly does Reverse 1999's story encapsulate all this? I'll avoid clear spoilers and focus on the setup, the experience, and the details scattered through the narrative. We meet Adele, a working-class girl who makes her living as a driver, ferrying the well-to-do Felicienne across Paris. After an elderly diviner literally dies of fright when she reads Adele's fate, they set out to find Beryl, a mystic who saw it happen and simply sat there smiling as everything erupted into chaos. As they start their search, they see that Paris is in turmoil. Crowds of people are protesting, and many seem to have delusions of taking part in the French Revolution, even though that was over a century in the past. As people start to disappear across the city, including Adele's best friend, rumors of the mythic beast of Gévaudan's return spread, the very beast that the diviner saw in her future. Adele is a bright and relatable character, and she quickly got me invested as she teamed up with the ethereal Beryl to untangle the fate of herself, her friends, and her city. I love the voice acting, complete with French accents and terms scattered throughout the dialogue, and the artwork is gorgeous as always. The story quickly dives into the supernatural, and it truly captured my attention when it started to force Adele to question her sense of reality in such a way that it made me question it as well. Were the fantastical and creepy things she encountered actually figments of her imagination? Was this a story about an overworked girl whose sanity is unraveling, or were the calm, kind, rational people who seemed to be trying to bring her back to reality in fact all conspiring against her and her missing friend? This was such a deft way to imbue the entire story with the existential philosophical questions which were so famously explored by the people of this time, and the way it was all presented had me utterly engrossed in everything that happened. Beryl's calm, detached, almost nihilistic presence was fascinating too, but honestly, Adele stole the show for me. Even though I was engrossed in the story from start to finish, I also kept noticing references to the real world, and it felt like an Easter egg hunt to find more. There were the obvious ones central to the story, first amongst them the French Blue Diamond, which was one of those rabbit holes I ended up falling down after finishing, plus others like the car Adele drove around in, or key names like Tavernier, which led me to some intriguing historical figures from further in the past, and it was really cool to look up even things like the bakery Adele frequently bought macarons from to find it was a real place which still exists. These details make the story feel grounded in the real world even in the midst of its most fantastical moments, and everything from the references in the story to the character designs themselves feels authentic to the era being portrayed. Beryl and Adele were wildly different fashion of the time, evoking high society in Beryl's case and working class in Adele's. I truly enjoyed this story, to the point that I'm looking forward to playing it through a second time on my own account once the patch has been released. The beginning was perhaps a little confusing, but I've learned to trust the process when it comes to stories in this game, and as always, everything quickly came together in a satisfying way. My only substantial critique is that the final chapters may be stretched a little too long. Once things got going, everything up to and including the final confrontation was very well paced, but afterwards it slowed down noticeably, though on balance, this may have been a necessity for all the different threads to be tied off completely, and it's better to have an extended ending than to leave things unresolved. Given the wider context of the game's narrative, it was pretty obvious from the start which direction it would take, but despite that, every step along the way was great. For anyone who's already played the quest, I'd love to hear what you thought as well. Reverse1999's approach to historical fiction strikes a delicate balance. The story itself is anything but an accurate depiction of real-world events, but by weaving together key details, ideas, and stylistic ambience, it captures the soul of each era it touches without any compromise within its nuanced and fascinating tales. This approach to historical inaccuracy always leaves me wanting to find out more, and sifting through the little things to find the truth behind the references makes it even more engaging. For me, the true goal of this genre is to spark people's interest in the stories of the past. This game gives me exactly that. I can't wait for all the great stories still to come, and I will find the time to go back and revisit everything so far, and finally talk about it all. Until next time!